Well, good afternoon, opera friends from around the region. Glad to be back with you again. The air has turned crisp, football season has started, and Virginia Opera's conveyor belt of masterpieces is cranking into gear all ready for you. So, we're here to take a look this afternoon at the opening night production that's coming right up on Friday of Offenbach's Orpheus aux Enfers, except we're doing it in English because it's a comedy, and the trouble with doing a comedy in French is nobody laughs at the jokes here on this side of the Atlantic. So you'll hear it in English, which means that it's Orpheus in the Underworld. Now, I realize, because I talk with so many of you in person as I travel around the region, that a lot of you, when you had your unit on classical mythology back in high school literature class, many of you were looking out the window, you were passing notes in class. You should never do that, but it happens. And so I know that classical mythology is a little bit of a turnoff for some of you. And some of you who may not even be familiar with this Offenbach operetta may be thinking, mythology, gods and goddesses, tragic mortals, destiny, fate, good and evil, big snore. You're thinking, maybe I'll wait till La Boheme. Let me rid you of your preconceptions, please. This is making fun of mythology. Oh, it's also making fun of grand opera. It's also making fun of, political satire and the French government of the time. This is as irreverent and zany and rollicking and absurdly, divinely absurd and wonderfully silly comedy as you will ever run across. Offenbach wrote only one serious opera in his life, his final unfinished masterpiece, The Tales of Hoffmann. Prior to that, he made a living in Paris. He was an expatriate German. His original name was Jakob Erbst. Did you know that? Yeah, he was born in Cologne, Germany. Probably spoke French with a terrific thick accent, which is kind of remarkable because he's become kind of an icon of Parisian musical style. Everybody looks to his can-can, which you'll hear a little bit later in this broadcast because it's from Orpheus, as kind of the standard of everything sophisticated and slightly naughty and witty about French music. So anyway, don't be afraid. Don't wait for La Boheme. Let's take a look at this piece and figure out what's going on because, as I say, we're in parody land. This is not a deadly parody. There's nothing mean in the satire. It's kind of frisky and frivolous and fun-loving and merrymaking. However, if I would say that this is to opera what painting a mustache and a beard on the Mona Lisa is to art. Okay? And the thing about that is that if you've never seen the Mona Lisa, then it doesn't really register with you what is being said, what it means when you see her with a mustache and a beard. So let's, and I also know, I know this because a few seasons back we did another Orpheus-themed opera. That was the one by the American composer Philip Glass, his wonderful opera Orpheus. In teaching classes on that opera at the time, I realized that about 2% of my adult students in my various college classes had any idea who Orpheus was. You know, I would say, now who can tell me who Orpheus was and what happened to him? And suddenly everybody is very interested in their shoelaces and they're staring at the floor. So a quick review, okay, because you have to know the Mona Lisa in order to appreciate defacing the Mona Lisa. Orpheus, and we know this from the poet Ovid, who wrote the definitive version of the story of Orpheus and his beautiful true love Eurydice. Around the time of Christ, Ovid gave us the definitive poem on the subject, and Orpheus was the greatest musician who ever lived. In artwork and statuary, you see him singing and playing upon his lyre, and we are told that when he sang, his voice was so beautiful that the rocks wept and the trees bowed down to him, and no one could resist him, the gods including. Now, on the day of his marriage to the beautiful Eurydice, she got bitten by a snake, and she died tragically and had to go to the Underworld, which in this mythological universe is called Hades. Orpheus is bereft, he's heartbroken, so he follows her down to the Underworld. And by the way, if you ever want to make the trip, you want to take the express subway. The local makes too many stops. So he goes straight down to the Underworld, where he pleads his case for the return of his wife, and he does it with music. And of course, it's so gosh darn beautiful that the gods capitulate to his demands, and they say, yes, here's a one-shot deal. You may take Eurydice back to Earth with you. However, you must lead the way, let her follow behind, and just so you know, if you turn around and look at her, she will be lost forever. He does with catastrophic results, so it's a sad ending. And, of course, for those of you who have been to Sunday school as often as you've been to the Harrison Opera House, that rings a bell because it's very similar to the story of Lot's wife. He turned around and looked at her, and she turned into a pillar of salt. So that's the story that Offenbach is going to mess around with. And I said that he's making fun of opera. Well, you should know that there have been between 70 and 100 operas written on this theme in all periods of music history. It's very popular with opera composers because of the two main themes in it. One is the power of music. Music hath charms to not only soothe the savage beast, but to manipulate the very gods. And it's also a very compelling love story about true marital love. In fact, the very first opera, at least the first opera for which a musical score survives, was on this subject. It was written in 1597 by the Florentine composer Jacopo Peri. It's called Eurydice, the Italian form of the leading lady's name. And it's not done very often. You want to know what the very first opera sounded like? Well, it sounds like this. Here's Orpheus lamenting his bad luck. And so that's kind of pleasant, isn't it? Now, granted, it doesn't sound like Puccini. Some of you are thinking, are you sure that's an opera? Are you sure that's not maybe a Renaissance madrigal? Nope, that is the first opera, again, the first surviving opera, Peri's Eurydice, and it does sound more like a solo for a tenor in late Renaissance or early Baroque style. It's not as dramatic as opera music would come to be. In fact, the next serious Orpheus opera I want to play for you is not the first opera, it's the first masterpiece, the first great opera that would still be performed today by the great genius Claudio Monteverdi, who in the first decade of the 17th century wrote his L'Orfeo, Orpheus. And he was the first guy to really get a handle on how operatic music could be visceral in conveying the emotional affects that the characters are experiencing and really delivering them like a kick from a mule to the audience. So here is a slightly more dramatic version of Orpheus's Lament by Monteverdi.
da me partita per mai più non tornare, ed io rimango. No, che sei versi alcuna cosa.
So in Monteverdi's vision, that music becomes a bit more intense. You could hear the grief of Orpheus building to a bit of a climax there. And now for our next serious look at an operatic Orpheus, let's jump ahead more than a century and a half to the 1760s. I believe it's 1762, and what many consider the definitive Orpheus opera, the greatest of them, by Christoph Willibald Gluck, the great opera reformer of the early classical period, and his Orfeo Euridice. Here we have an operatic excerpt that may be more familiar to you because this has become a standard operatic selection. It's the great aria Che farò senza Euridice? What will I do without my Euridice? Sung by Orpheus. That is often, back then it would have been done by a castrated male soprano. So these days it's often sung by a mezzo soprano. Here's the end of this very famous aria sung by Teresa Berganza. And it's not just centuries ago that you had your Orpheus operas. It continues to be treated by contemporary living composers. For instance, Ricky Ian Gordon, the very successful American composer whose Rappahannock County had its world premiere at the Harrison Opera House a few years back, has written an Orpheus and Eurydice. And now here's I'll conclude our little survey of the serious Orpheus operas with a clip of a love duet from Philip Glass's Orphée. And this is a little snippet from the Virginia Opera production of, I think it was about 4 seasons ago. Here Orpheus is singing a love duet, but not with his wife, that bad boy. He has fallen in love with the princess, who is the shadowy leader of the underworld, because you see, Orpheus, the tortured artist, is in love with death. All righty, which kind of also proves the point, in case you missed that production, that not all 20th century music sounds like cats yowling or pots and pans banging. It was actually kind of pleasant. All righty, so you see, this is the subject that Offenbach wanted to thumb his nose at. And boy, did he, because in the operetta Orpheus in the Underworld, things are a little upside down. Orpheus and his wife, in Offenbach's vision, it's not their wedding day. They've been married for a while and they're bored with each other. They are a Parisian couple. They've got the 7-year itch and they can't stand one another. They want a divorce. They each are carrying on an extramarital affair. Orpheus has his nymph. Eurydice has her shepherd boy. And the first time that Orpheus and his wife see each other on stage. They mistake each other for their, affairs. And when they get close, when Eurydice sees that it's Orpheus, she goes, "Oh, hell, it's my husband." She goes on to complain to the audience, "I have managed to marry the most boring man in Greece, the most boring man in the world." And the worst thing, you see, in this operetta, Orpheus retains his identity as a musician. He's a violinist and a composer. And that violin, that squealing, scraping, raspy violin is stepping on Eurydice's last nerve. And if she ever has to hear it again, she's going to kill somebody. And, of course, Orpheus's feelings are hurt that she scorns his magical, wonderful violin compositions. He says, "Oh, no, you'll like this one. Here, you have to hear my latest concerto. It's only an hour and a half." Here's the Orpheus Eurydice duet from scene 1, in which he's trying to woo her with wonderful violin playing, and she's not so impressed. Yeah, well, I've heard worse, but Eurydice, the trouble is Eurydice's been getting this night and day. He's more interested in his violin than he is in her, is the problem. So this is a kind of a big bone of contention. They have they say, "We've got to separate. I never want to see you again." Orpheus stomps off in a huff, and Eurydice is glad to see that her boyfriend arrives. So here is the shepherd Aristeus, and he bids her to join him in this meadow. There's a little meadow for her to tiptoe through, and that's when she gets bit by the snake, and she discovers, to her morbid fascination, that she appears to be dying. They have a little conversation about this. Eurydice says, "So, I'm dying, right?" And Aristeus says, "Yeah, this is death. It's happening. Oh, and by the way, I'm not really the shepherd Aristeus. I'm Pluto, the god of the underworld. Nice to meet you." She says, "This is weird. I know it's death and that's bad, but it's not as bad as I always thought it would be. It doesn't really hurt." And Pluto agrees, "Yeah, it's not so bad. A lot of people like it." So Eurydice sings an aria. It's actually one of those French couplets, those songs that have a couple of verses, in which she kind of reflects on what it feels like to die. And, friends, when I do these opera talks on WHRO, a lot of times I get very analytical. I try to teach you how to listen for the motifs, and the psychological implications of the music and the literary values of the music. That's not how this opera works. This is more like a Broadway musical. It's just lovely tunes. That's it. There's nothing really to analyze. It's not learned music. It's just enjoyable music. However, to his credit, I think that Offenbach does an interesting job here of meeting the challenge of what would it sound like, the music of a pleasant death. It's kind of hypnotic. It's like going into a trance, and it certainly gives, in this case, the soprano Nathalie Dessay, an opportunity to weave beautiful, pretty, magical vocal lines. Here she is reflecting on her death. All right, so there are musical rewards in this opera. He gives the singers a chance to show what they can do, and there are some lovely moments, even if there's no counterpoint, there's not a lot of deep psychology, no leitmotifs. We're couldn't care less about leitmotifs and all that sort of thing. Well, Pluto says, well, that's it. You and me, we got a date down in Hades, so come with me. She leaves at Pluto's suggestion. She leaves a note for her husband, which is something to the effect of, Dear Orpheus, Aristeos turned out to be Pluto. We're gone to the underworld. Sorry, no supper. Love, Eurydice. Orpheus comes back. He discovers the note. He has this wonderful opportunity to get a laugh from the audience because he reads the note, and it's something like this. My wife has died. My wife is dead. Woohoo! All right, where's my girlfriend? And he's off to celebrate by going to visit his mistress when in walks a matronly, middle-aged French woman who looks like a respectable housewife. And she says, stop right there, bucko. Who are you, says Orpheus. She says, my name is Public Opinion. And you've got to do the story correctly. You are heartbroken to lose your beloved Eurydice. And Orpheus says, look, I'm sorry, I'm really not. I'm just so not heartbroken. Yes, you are. And you're going to go straight down to Hades right now, and you're going to beg the gods to bring her back. Are you crazy? He said, why would I want to do that? Because I am Public Opinion, and I will ruin you. Now, march. So she's literally giving him marching orders, and they have a wonderful duet in which, appropriately, the music sounds like a march. Here's the Public Opinion bossing our hero around.
Je maudis le guide fidèle qui me suit, jusqu'au retour, qui me suit pas jusqu'au retour. Marchons. C'est le nœud qui m'appelle et lorsque je vois vite, cours, viens. C'est le nœud qui m'appelle et lorsque je vois vite.
And for the rest of the show, poor Orpheus is going to have to reluctantly say all the lines like out of Ovid under metaphorical gunpoint from Public Opinion. It's one of the best strokes of wit in this entire show. So before they can go to the underworld, they have to go up to the classical mythological version of heaven, Mount Olympus, where all the gods like Jupiter, who's the big head god, the big cheese enchilada god, the president of the God Association, they have to go up there and ask permission to go down to Hades. So scene one ends, and we go up to Mount Olympus, in which now we're going to get into a little bit of good-natured political humor. You know, we like to complain about the Do-Nothing Congress here in our society, and it's always people were complaining about the Do-Nothing Congress in Abraham Lincoln's time. And it's, of course, the same today. Just look at the polls. Well, it must have been the same with the Parliament, or whatever the Senate is called, in 19th century France, because up there where the power brokers are, the gods, you know, they're like the legislature. They're the government of the cosmos. And all they do is sit around. They do nothing. They sip nectar, and that's all that happens up there. And frankly, a lot of them are getting pretty bored. They sing an opening chorus about, gee, all we do is sit here. Nothing ever happens. And we just sip nectar. And as for Jupiter, he's quite the hypocrite. Again, I don't want to get into the politics of the day, but obviously there are some targets in mind here. Jupiter's always preaching morality to the other gods and how they must be a model for the mortals below, and yet he's got a girlfriend stashed in every corner of heaven, and he's always getting called out for his hypocrisy. So Offenbach and his librettist Ludovic Alevi are kind of inserting the needle with some pointed jabs at French government. For instance, and now this is the scene in which all the various goddesses, Minerva and Diana and Cupid and Juno, they all get a chance to shine and sing little solos. Diana comes in. She's the goddess of the hunt, you'll remember. And she has been stood up by her lover. She had a tryst all planned with him, and he didn't show. And she sings a little song, which has a nice hunting rhythm, very appropriately, in which she's kind of carping about, men, they never do what you want. She can't believe that she got stood up.
C'est pour y chercher Actéon, c'est près des rues Clairefontaine, que Diane rencontre Actéon,
And that just couldn't sound more Offenbach-y. And Jupiter responds by saying, "Oh yes, I can tell you why he didn't show up. You were having a naughty affair that I had not approved, so I changed your lover into a stag, and you'll never see him again." And this is when the other gods start to say, "Oh, come on, you are one to talk. You are constantly cheating on your wife Juno. We don't want to hear about it." Well, Mercury, the messenger god, shows up. And by the way, there's a particular reason that Offenbach chose a show that had such a large cast. Prior to Orpheus in the Underworld, which premiered in 1858, all through the 1850s, he'd been writing tiny little miniature shows because the license to practice theater that he'd received from the French government only allowed him to have 3 performers on stage. Very restrictive. So he was writing these little tiny jewel box one-act musicals with a tiny cast. And in 1858, the government lifted those restrictions, so suddenly the world was his oyster. Offenbach could have as big a show as he wanted. So he chose a big splashy, we would think of it as a Cecil B. DeMille Hollywood epic, with all these gods and shepherds and demons and shepherdesses and Orpheus and his wife, and a huge cast, a huge orchestra, a full-length evening in the theater, and they all get to show off. Now, I'm going to... Mercury delivers the message that Eurydice is in Hades with Pluto, and his wife, her husband, Orpheus, is coming up, will be there any moment. Orpheus wants to, plead for his wife's return. And there comes this wonderful moment, which I believe Sir Arthur Sullivan paid a lot of attention to. The operettas of Jacques Offenbach predate Gilbert and Sullivan's operettas by about a generation. 1850s for Offenbach, and then the last couple of decades of the 19th century for Gilbert and Sullivan. And both of these guys like to poke fun at grand opera. Now, one of the things that annoys a lot of people about Italian opera is the fact that the words get repeated over and over because you have a certain number of words for a solo, and yet you've got maybe a 5-minute aria with a certain structure, an A section, a B section, return to the A section, a coda, and so forth. And often there's nothing to do but repeat those words. So like in Il Trovatore, when Manrico learns that his mother Azucena is going to be tortured and executed, he has that aria, Di quella pira, and over he's saying, "I must rescue her, I will come to her aid, I will rescue her, I will come to her aid, you shall not die, I will come to your aid, I will rescue her." And you in the audience are thinking, they could be killing her right now. Would you please stop singing and just do it? And there is something a little bit absurd. We have to kind of shelve our the way we process reality, have a little suspension of belief, and just allow that to happen for the sake of the music. But it's easy to make fun of. So in this little selection I'm going to play for you, the gods see Orpheus approaching. And we have this chorus in which they say, he comes, he advances. He's coming, he's advancing. Oh, look, he comes, he advances. Here he comes. It gets a little absurd. Here's that little moment from scene 2. And all they were saying is, he's coming. Here he comes. He's coming. You know, this makes me think, I think that Arthur Sullivan was paying attention to that because in The Pirates of Penzance, there is a moment in Act 2 when the policemen, those kind of crazy cop policemen, are talking about how they're going to go and do their duty, and they're marching around saying, we go, we go, we go. And as Major General Stanley points out, you're not going. So maybe Jacques Offenbach is a little bit of an influential composer there, and I think Arthur Sullivan is not the only artist he influenced. Well, Orpheus is finally there, and reluctantly, with being glared at by public opinion, he duly says his lines, "Oh gods, please return to me, my beloved wife Eurydice." You'll hear public opinion in this next excerpt say, "Allons, let's go." And he clears his throat and launches into his formal plea, which sounds strangely familiar. Remember Teresa Berganza several minutes ago singing Que Faro? Listen. Yeah, kind of thumbing our nose at a classic. Now, let me point out something important about this kind of satire. Friends, you and I live in 2015. We live in a post-ironic age. We are accustomed to satire. We've digested all of Gilbert and Sullivan, Monty Python, Saturday Night Live, Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart. We get it. Nothing shocks us. We're used to irreverence. You have to understand, you know why this show became so successful? Because after some lackluster original sales following the first production, the first performances in 1858, the sales slacked off a little bit, and then a critic named Jules Javin published a review in one of the leading newspapers in which he said, this show should be banned. They should shut down the theater. It's disgraceful. It's vulgar. They're making fun of Gluck. How dare they? That is high art. High art should not be ridiculed. And the classical mythology, what will happen to society and civilization if we start making fun of these things? No one should go to this show. It's a scandal. And of course, everyone in Paris said, ooh, they said it should be banned. Let's go. And from that point on, you couldn't buy a ticket because it was sold out for many years. So you have to understand that what you just heard, that parody of the aria from Gluck's Orfeo ad Eurydice, that was shocking in a way that it's not to us. You have to kind of hear it with 19th century ears. They were not used to opera, it's like making fun of religion. It's like, we all sit up when Donald Trump says something that sounds shockingly inappropriate. This was shockingly inappropriate back in 1858 in a way that maybe, it doesn't, we're accustomed to that now. We're quite sophisticated. Well, I think that not only Gilbert and Sullivan learned a trick or two from Jacques Offenbach, I think Giuseppe Verdi did, and this one might surprise you. Jupiter says, yeah, it's fine. You can go down to Hades and get your wife back. And you know what? You might want a bodyguard. I'll go down with you. Because actually Jupiter has heard that Eurydice is a pretty good-looking woman and he wants to have a fling with her too. And at this, all the other gods rebel. They say, we want to go too. It's boring up here. We're tired of drinking nectar. Let's all go to hell. It sounds fun. And Jupiter says, oh, okay. You can all come with me. Let's all go to hell. So the finale of Act 1 is everybody on stage singing about, oh, what fun it will be to visit the underworld. This, again, is just truly authentic, the music that we think of when we think of Offenbach. Isn't that fun? That's just infectious. Now you want to go, don't you? Before you were going to wait for La Boheme. Now you want to come see Orpheus in the Underworld. Now, that music was first heard in 1858. Only a few months later in 1859, Giuseppe Verdi, who was the greatest living master of opera of the day, along with Wagner, but Verdi had a much bigger reputation at that point, he came out with one of his masterpieces, A Masked Ball, Un ballo in maschera, a historical drama about a true event, the assassination of King Gustav V of Sweden. And I think that Verdi was listening to that music you just heard, because the end of Scene 1 in Masked Ball has the King Gustav learning that there is a fortune teller, a witch, on the outskirts of the city. And he needs to investigate this. You don't want a witch hanging around, but he's inclined to take it not too seriously. And he says, he says to all the courtiers gathered in his palace, let's all go and get our fortunes told. Let's visit the fortune teller. And everybody says, yeah, that's fun. Let's all have fun and go visit the fortune teller. See if you hear what I hear in this choral finale. See, this is my theory. That music was heard mere months after the Offenbach finale that I played earlier. Um, I think that Verdi, Verdi knew everything. His publisher Ricordi sent him scores of all the new operas that came out from all over the world. Verdi was very cosmopolitan, very sophisticated. He knew all the everything that was happening in the opera world. And that Verdi had never written anything that sounded like that before. Usually, either his choral numbers are lyrical, like arias for a choir, like from Nabucco, the Va Pensiero, or they're kind of sound like Methodist hymns, like this one. And so forth. You see the contrast? So, as silly and ridiculous and absurd as Orpheus in the Underworld is, it was such a big hit. The world had never seen anything like it before, and I think that Verdi and Gilbert and Sullivan were paying attention. Well, in Act 2, we are down in Hades, and when the curtain goes up, we're dropping in on our old girlfriend Eurydice. And you know what? There's an old saying, folks, the grass is always greener on the other side of eternity. Now that she's with Pluto, now that she's rid of her boring husband Orpheus, she kind of wishes she was back with him, because the underworld has turned out to be, it really has turned out to be hell. She's bored. Basically, Pluto's got her locked up in a jail cell. There's nothing to do. And she sings a song which, again, has no great musical depth. I mean, this is not a masterpiece. It's just a really good tune. It's a really good number in which she's lamenting the fact that she's bored and wishes she had her old life back. Now, when you listen to this, this is my favorite number in the show, and I think there's something interesting about it. You know, it doesn't sound dated. This tune, I think, could have been written in the 1950s by Lerner and Lowe, or except there's a little bit of coloratura that we don't get from Broadway singers, but it's got an easy kind of swing to it. I think it sounds perennially fresh. There's nothing dated about it. I think it's a really great number, and trust me, by now it's an earworm. I drive around Virginia and I can't get this song out of my head. Now, come on, doesn't that have a kind of a winning quality? I really enjoy that one. It just isn't high art. It's not lofty. It isn't pretentious. Offenbach wanted to make fun of pretentious, the kind of high art that he personally found pretentious, that they were doing over at the Paris Opéra, the Grand Opera House on the other side of the town. And he had a kind of a reason for doing that. It was his objective to write a serious opera, a real opera, and yet both the Opéra and the Opéra Comique, the two traditional opera houses, they were not interested. They kept rejecting his proposals. Fine, you won't hire me? I'm going to make fun of you. I'll make you sorry that you turned me down. So it's, again, that has a kind of a Broadway feel to me. Now, we move on to the next love duet. There's a love duet between Jupiter and Eurydice. She is in her jail cell. and nobody can find her. Jupiter is being taken on a tour of Hades by Pluto. He's the visiting dignitary, so Pluto is showing him around the joint. Yeah, over there's the conference room. This is our cafeteria. There's the faculty lounge. Help yourself, And they hurry past this locked room, and Jupiter figures, aha, that's where he must be stashing Eurydice. I've got to find a way to get in there because it's locked. Well, he's a god. He can magically change himself, like Dracula changes himself into a bat. Cupid gives the idea to Jupiter that, you can get in there. So now listen carefully. He changes himself into a housefly so that he can fly through the keyhole and be with Eurydice, who, when she spots this housefly, will not whack it with a newspaper, but fall in love with it and sing a passionate love duet with the housefly. And, of course, she can sing her lovely seductive melody, and poor Jupiter, all he can do is make buzzing sounds. Look, this kind of humor is either to your taste or it isn't. I know some of you opera lovers, you want lofty. You want high art. You want the cosmos explained. You want lumps in your throat. You want tears in your eyes. You want something real. This is different. This is entertainment. Let go of your need for the lofty. Just be satisfied with some divinely silly humor and some good melodies, and understand that there's not going to be one legitimate, serious expression of real human emotion in this entire evening. That's not his aim. So here you go. At first you'll hear Jupiter discussing his plans of how he's going to seduce her as a fly, and I think you'll know when the big metamorphosis happens. Okay. Now, I got to tell you, my trusty engineer today, the recording engineer, is your friend Dwight Davis, who kind of almost lost it during that. He was over there trying to not chuckle too loudly. And different people will react differently to this humor. I get it. Because I've taught a few lifelong learning classes on this show at this point, and some people just stare at me and say, why would anyone want to go to something this juvenile? Those are the lofty art people. There are other people who are thinking, oh, I have got to go see this. I have just got to. So, kind of let your guard down a little bit and be seduced by some Gallic wit is my advice to you. And if you really know that you don't like this kind of silliness, well, trust me, we've got Flying Dutchman on the way. You'll get all the serious you can handle, I promise. Romeo and Juliet, oh my goodness. We bring it all to you on the stage of the Opera House. Now, Jupiter and Eurydice, they're into each other, as the kids say. And he comes up with a plan. He says, look, there's going to be a big party. Everybody in the cosmos, all the gods will be there. We're going to get down and, dance the night away. And so that'll be our chance. We're going to disguise you as the priestess of Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry. And during all the falderal, you and I will kind of sneak out. So the scene changes, and by George, the party is getting into gear. They've got a DJ, they've got an open bar, the wine is flowing, and all the demons of hell are welcoming the gods of Mount Olympus, and it just couldn't sound more hellish. Oh, very satanic, be very, very afraid. Devils in all of their wicked glory. So, actually, it turns out that Jupiter, when it comes to a party in hell, is a little bit of a buzzkill. He's a wet blanket. Jupiter says, I know what would be fun. You all like dancing, eh? Well, let's do a stately minuet. And everybody goes, oh, no. But, he's the big chief cheese enchilada god, so you got to do what he says. So reluctantly, everybody's doing a minuet with rolling their eyes. Well, that goes over like a lead balloon, as it should. And now comes the moment that not only all the gods and demons of hell were waiting for, but you in the audience, because here comes the tune that you all know. The tune that was adopted by the Moulin Rouge and many, I think it used to be a TV commercial for Dubochet. Remember that? With Dubochet, with Dubochet. All of you are kind of experts in French operetta, even if you didn't know it, because you all know the Galop Infernal. Now, why didn't I call it a can-can? Because Offenbach never heard of the can-can. The can-can was not a thing during Offenbach's lifetime. He died at age 60 in the early 1880s. The can-can did not really become a thing until the 1890s. What was a thing, along with the waltz, there were two dances that were the big dance craze in Europe during Offenbach's time. The waltz, as propagated by the Strauss family, that all of them, Johann Jr., and so forth, and the galop. The galop was a two-step dance in 2/4 time as opposed to the 3/4 time of the waltz. And basically what you did was take your partner and literally gallop from one side of the dance hall and then return to the other side. It was athletic. It was tiring. People loved it. And this is what happens as you get towards the finale of Orpheus in the Underworld. Berlioz never heard of a can-can. The trouble is that in the Virginia opera production, will it be staged like a can-can? Well, it kind of will, because by now, a century and more later, you kind of can't put the can-can toothpaste back in the tube. The associations are too strong. We all think of it as a can-can. And so, yes, I'm told from Adam Turner, our maestro leading the opera, that the choreography is in the style of a can-can. So here it is, the moment that everybody will be waiting for, because it's the excerpt that they know from this opera. There it is, the tune that is probably the thing that has brought Offenbach more celebrity than anything else. Well, the show quickly gets to the conclusion, and of course, another buzzkill happens. Public opinion makes her entrance, and she is bound and determined that Orpheus will play his role the way Ovid wrote it. So she makes him beg for his wife's life, and Jupiter has no chance but to say, okay, you can take her back, but don't look back, blah, blah, blah. And Orpheus would like to do nothing more than look back and lose his wife forever, but there's public opinion saying, don't you do it, you keep going forward. Jupiter decides to take things into his own hands. He is the god of the cosmos. He can throw lightning bolts and thunderbolts anytime he wants. So he throws a lightning bolt directly behind public opinion and Orpheus. They have no choice but to turn around and see what that was, which means Eurydice is lost forever, which actually in this cockeyed world is a happy ending. Everyone rejoices and they launch into another version of the can-can. Now, I'll leave you with one more musical excerpt, but not from Orpheus in the Underworld. It's from Carnival of the Animals by Camille Saint-Saëns. How do you parody a parody? Orpheus in the Underworld is a parody, and Saint-Saëns decided to, when he was looking for appropriate music for the tortoises in Carnival of the Animals, he did the funniest thing ever, a big musical joke. Now you know the main tune of the can-can, da ba 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 bum bum ba 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 bum bum, and so forth. Here are the double basses in the tortoises from Carnival of the Animals. See if you can pick out this tune in super, super duper slow motion. The strings doing the can-can, it's a wonderful visual image when you think about it, isn't it? The can-cans slowly lifting their legs, slowly hiking up their skirts and showing you their naughty, racy underwear. And if I know Jacques Offenbach with his personality, no one would have gotten a bigger laugh out of that parody than Offenbach himself. So that's the show. No leitmotifs, no counterpoint, no great depths of human understanding and explaining the human condition. Just some laughs and some memorable tunes, some dancing, some sight gags. That's our opening show, Orpheus Enfer, Orpheus in the Underworld. You know you want to come. I will see you there.